Mad Max Furiosa should never have been made.
Do you have it in you to make it epic?
Now, this isn't because this is a movie that's bad or it's got good reviews or bad reviews, but the film itself, the process of how they made it was so complicated that it's amazing that it's even making the big screen. Now, this isn't Furiosa, it's the film prior to it, Mad Max Fury Road. Mad Max seems like it was one of the most challenging movies to ever have been made. And I find it so inspiring as a filmmaker, a creative, and just someone who loves watching behind the scenes. If you don't know, Mad Max Fury Road was canceled on multiple occasions when it started getting made. In the early 2000s, they were set to go to camera, only to be stopped by 9/11.
The American dollar dropped by 25% against the Australian dollar. So within 2 or 3 days, we lost almost a quarter of our budget.
But when they went to go to camera in 2010, it was then delayed again due to weather.
We couldn't shoot Mad Max, not only aesthetically, but we couldn't drive across it.
But this didn't stop Miller and his team. They decided to go back once the weather had settled and were reminded of what rain does to a desert climate. After the span of 15 years and destructing the entire set and reconstructing it in different locations, shipping the entire film from destination to destination, they were able to shoot the film. But that didn't come with a bunch of complications attached to that.
There are things that are always going to go contrary to the plans. Mad Max Fury Road was probably a heightened version of that.
But George Miller is not foreign to complicated filmmaking processes. His original Mad Max film is a film school on its own. The first movie was shot for under $1 million on a shoestring budget and ended up becoming a cult classic. One thing that I've been wondering about while going down this Mad Max rabbit hole is why did it end up so successful in the first place? Not Fury Road, which has become like a cultural standard of watching these post-apocalyptic action films, but way back in the 1970s, the original one starring Mel Gibson. This movie kind of came out of nowhere and was the most successful Australian film of that time, and actually one of the most successful indie films ever made, making over $100 million. It could be debated that this is one of the most profitable films of all time. But why would a post-apocalyptic road film gain so much success? Well, you might think that it is the fan base in Australia or people are into cars, but it actually ended up being overseas. I'm not the only person who was wondering why it became so successful. Director George Miller wondered the same thing, and this actually goes down to a film philosophy. So the storytelling theory comes from a gentleman named Joseph Campbell, who believed that all humans, no matter where we are in the world, have a deep down set of stories that we live by. Either instinctually or just as a species, we all have these stories inside of us. Now, the works of Joseph Campbell ended up influencing Mad Max Thunderdome and the rest of George Miller's films, and also other famous filmmakers like Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and probably many more. This theory that we're all connected by the same sort of instinctual stories as humans is really fascinating and also makes a ton of sense once you start looking at the success of franchises outside of Mad Max.
Everything that you see in the film is not only something you can find variations of in history, but you also find them in the news today.
You start recognizing that we're not really that different and that we all have similar interests, not through spectacle or stimulation, but through the human story.
I've done a lot of films in the action space, and often it can feel like it's spectacle for the sake of the spectacle, whereas I think what George is doing, everything is informing the story, it's supporting the character's journey, the arc, it has a reason. It's not just for, visual sort of aesthetics.
Going back to Mad Max Fury Road, the film is just a cinematic spectacle, and there are plenty of videos talking about its color grade or even its production design, its clever use of visual effects, but I think the most inspiring thing about this film is its dedication to its original vision. And that's the use of storyboards.
George and Brendan McCarthy and a couple of other storyboard artists basically wrote the story in storyboards.
The interesting thing about Mad Max is that there wasn't a script. They ended up using storyboards with some dialogue beside it to guide the filmmakers. But the principal cast, with the minimal dialogue, had nothing to work with, which made a very frustrating filmmaking process, and actors like Tom Hardy or Charlize Theron started hating each other and disliking the process on set and having a really complicated time. As a filmmaker who makes his own stuff, I found the challenges of this film more inspiring than its successes. The spoiler alert, the movie ended up winning 6 Academy Awards and nominated for a bunch more. It launched obviously Furiosa and became a modern cult classic. I've rewatched it since and it stands the tests of time and still is one of the best action films ever. But I think the challenges that it went through are some things that we can look at. And the fact that there is a sequel, another one within the universe, and perhaps maybe even more to be born, is something we can learn about movie franchises and just films in general. The more I look at the Mad Max franchise, the more I'm recognizing that it's not really that original. Miller stole from a lot of different filmmakers and other stories out there. Things like Lawrence of Arabia, A Boy and His Dog, and Ben-Hur. Using a formula of 3, blending them together to create something that's unseen. And this is something that I use all of the time, and I teach it in my new course. I'm so excited to share about it. This is the 4-week Filmmaker. There will be a link to it in the description below. If you want to learn how to make a film in the span of 4 weeks, you'll learn about conceptualizations of coming up with concepts similar to how Miller came up with Mad Max. We're going to talk about pre-production, production, post-production, and finally distribution, getting that film out there. So if you've ever thought about making a movie or just wanted to learn the inner mechanics of how to make one, I'm going to be teaching you how to make a 1 to 2 minute film, but all of the principles and foundations to even make a feature film. You can go take a look at that in the description below. Doors are open. Can't wait to see you there. Now, the only way this film was actually going to get made was how dialed in they were to the approach. And I think this is the first lesson to be learned from the process. If you want to make a movie but have no resources, have a dialed in preparation of that film. And what they had was not only storyboards, but they built models, pre-shot things with like little tiny cars, and dialed in with stunt performers and production design people so that by the time they went to camera, the film had already been shot in everyone's heads. The biggest thing was execution, which was incredibly important considering how intense each day was when they filmed. They had insane stunts and practical setups that would have been impossible to do without major preparation. And this also shows that if with good preparation, a film can stand the tests of time. Even with the financial problems that the studios were going through and the new leadership that the studio was bought through, they still made the movie 12 years after initial greenlight. The next thing I want to talk about is directing. The big learning lesson I gained from watching the behind the scenes is how much pressure someone like George was under. And having something so powerful like a vision going into it was how they were able to execute it.
Here they come again, worming their way into the black matter of my brain.
You promised to help.
I tell myself, they cannot touch me. They are long dead.
Okay, something else that I found really fascinating about the film wasn't the production, but it was rather the editing. Now, George's right-hand assistant is also his wife. She ended up winning an Oscar for the film's editing, and a clever technique that they did, outside of these crazy like zoom-in shots when he's going crazy at the beginning and the fast pacing, was the fact that they used, I believe it's called pan and scan, using the idea of a crosshair in the center of the frame to make sure that we weren't bouncing around in the shot. So if action was happening on the left side, they would make sure that all the shots were scaled in so that our eyes were stuck to the left, and then it would migrate to the middle and then off to the right, but never would shots cut in and out of each other without keeping a consistent focal point. This was how they were able to cut between shots faster, have quicker action moments without the audience feeling confused or dizzy, which leads to some fun film theory. After the movie was done, they did a test screening. They'd only shot the middle of the movie, which if you've seen it, is all an action scene. And when they did the test screenings, no one liked the movie. There was too much action. And it just makes me realize like how nice it is to make movies without doing something like test screenings or the fact that there is an audience who has to like watch through stuff to say if it's good or not. And I think like if you guys want that, the best element for free is YouTube, making videos and learning how an audience watches. I'm just checking Mad Max Furiosa out right now. It has a 15-minute action scene that filmed for 78 days. Just think about that. A 15-minute scene that goes for 78 days. A 15-minute movie for me takes 3 days. Let's read this article. 78 days to shoot and required nearly 200 stunt workers on set daily. It was very important. No matter what you're working on, no matter how complicated things are happening, whether your actors hate each other on set or the fact that you might have been kicked out of a location, just remember, George Miller was kicked out of his location for 12 years.